Hello there, welcome to this lesson on how did the Great Depression affect Germany. So this lesson is all about how Germany was affected by the Great Depression, which was sparked off by an event known as the Wall Street crash in America, which took place on the 24th of October 1929. You'll know from our work on the Golden Age that Germany had borrowed money from America through the Dawes Plan 1924 and Young Plan 1929. And therefore, when the American economy started to struggle and collapse after the Wall Street crash, that affected Germany as well. It used to be said that if America sneezes, the world catches a cold, and America very much was a super spreader in terms of economic depression during this time. So this led to a collapse in the German economy in the early 1930s. It led to 6 million being unemployed. 5 German banks went bust in the summer of 1931. And it caused many people to turn to extreme political parties. So what I'd like to do to start off with is just write the title and date in your books and then just answer that question. How would the Great Depression have helped the Nazis? Just answer that in your exercise books. So we'll just pause the video while you do that. Okay, so you should have had some ideas from that, especially with those two posters there, that the Great Depression was really important in helping the Nazis to gain support. They went from 12 seats in 1928 to 107 seats in 1930. See those posters? Arbeit und Brot means work and bread. Unsere letzte Hoffnung means our last hope. And therefore this was a really important factor in the eventual Nazi rise to power. So what you're going to look at in this lesson is how did the Great Depression affect Germany. You're going to start off by thinking about what was the impact of the Great Depression on Germany generally and German people. And then we're going to talk about how that led to the collapse of the Weimar Republic and really the collapse of democracy in Germany during this time as well. So the next task I want you to do is to have a look at these statistics here. These are election results on 3 major political parties in Germany during this time: the Social Democrats, the SPD, the Nazi Party and the Communists, and just showing their electoral support. And I just want you to write down what you can infer about the impact of the Great Depression. So just pause that and you can do that now. Right, so you should have got that one of the key consequences of the Great Depression is the real kind of increase in people voting for extremist parties. I suppose people are looking for a solution to their problems. The Nazis offered people work and bread, which was quite a captivating promise for people, whilst many poorer people in Germany during this time voted for the Communist Party anyway, and communist ideas were quite popular in Germany during this time, having spread already, within Europe after the Russian Revolution in 1917. So as I said before, the nice quote to remember is America sneezes and the world catches a cold. It shows that the American economy really drove the world economy during this time, as in many ways it still does now. And obviously the German economy is very much tied to the American economy. Remember, Gustav Stresemann had said in the 1920s that Germany was dancing on a volcano, and he himself was aware of the problems of basing their wealth on American money. So how did the Great Depression affect Germany? So you might want to put this as a title in your books just to make a few notes about some of the main ways in which the Great Depression affected Germany. So we talked about the Wall Street crash. The date itself was known as Black Thursday. It caused eventually German banks to run out of money and caused the German economy to collapse as well. So we're just going to look at that in more detail, some of the statistics around that. So this shows you some of the key points about who suffered in the Great Depression. Lots of youth unemployment. So in 1933, over half of all Germans between the ages of 16 and 30 were unemployed. 60% of new university graduates could not get a job. Farmers were struggling, slipping into debt. 40% of all factory workers were unemployed by 1932. Lots of businesses failed during this time. I reckon about 50,000 businesses failed. And that pie chart there just shows you where people were getting any help if they were unemployed during this time. So many people, 15% of people, got no help at all, no benefits at all during this time. So people had to resort to begging, People resorted to things like eating horse soup, for example. People lost their homes. People were living in the forests outside Berlin in sort of makeshift campsites. So this was a really, really difficult time in Germany. And obviously, if you take into account that we'd had hyperinflation as well, obviously there was a real problem with the economy in Germany during this time. Unemployment's a massive issue, so it peaks around about 6 million unemployed in 1932, so that's a huge problem. They didn't really want to do anything like print any more money and cause inflation because of the hyperinflation crisis, so unemployment was a big issue in Germany during this time. Here's a nice quote from a German worker speaking in 1934 about the Great Depression. Thousands of factories closed their doors. Hunger was the daily companion of the German working man. Many an honest working man had to resort to theft to obtain food. All fellow citizens yearned for better times. As for me, like many another, I had lost all I possessed. So early in 1930, I joined the Nazi Party. It's quite a good source, that, just for explaining why many German workers did actually join the Nazi Party. You know, saw Hitler as their last hope. They were captivated, I suppose, by the promise the Nazis made of work and bread. So you can just pause this just to kind of read some and make a few notes about how the Great Depression affected people in Germany. So there's loads of really good facts and statistics here. So if you just pause that, and then you can make some notes in answering the question, how did the Great Depression affect people in Germany? Okay, so you should have had enough time to do that. So let's have a little look at some more information about this topic. So this is a source which is called A Fairy Tale of Christmas. It's a short story written in 1931 by Rudolf Leonard, a member of the Communist Party. And I just want you to add to some of the notes you've been making by writing down 2 inferences that you can make from this source. So I'll just read this source for you. No one knew how many of them there were. They completely filled the streets. They stood or lay about in the streets as if they had taken root there. The streets were grey, their faces were grey, and even the hair on their heads and stubble on the cheeks of the youngest there was grey with dust and their terrible struggles. It seemed like everyone was poor and everyone was without work. It's a really good source, that, just for showing that absolute desperation. This sort of image of these people that are hungry and homeless and their faces are grey, they're unhealthy, they haven't got much hope. And think about that poster that we saw before, that Our Last Hope poster. You know, you can see why many people were turning to extreme parties during this time. So this shows you an example of the type of exam question you could get for question number 5. And you're just going to have a quick go at this question now, and I'm going to give you about 10 minutes to do it. So what I'd like you to do is to have a go at answering that question in your books. In what ways were the lives of German people affected by the Great Depression? You'll need to use some of the notes and some of the things that you've learnt about already in this lesson. So this gives you just an example paragraph to help you. So we'll leave this on the board while you have a go at doing this practice question. So really what you need to do for this question is write 3 paragraphs, and for each of the paragraphs you need to talk about in what way were the lives of German people affected. So give that sort of example of evidence, but also be able to explain, well, how their lives changed, how did it affect them. So use a phrase like this meant that, just to help you out with that. So just pause this. You can pause it for about 10 minutes while you do this question. Okay, so we're done on that now. So we're now going to go on to look at why the Weimar Republic collapsed. So one of the significant consequences of the Great Depression was that it led to the collapse of the Weimar Republic. So in October 1929, we had the death of Stresemann and the Wall Street crash, and that triggered off the Great Depression. Now what's really important to know is that in September 1930, Heinrich Brüning, who'd become the new Chancellor, called an election in Germany. And this was possibly, in hindsight, a very poor decision, because it led to a growth in extreme political parties like the Communists and the Nazis, and just made Germany a lot more difficult to run. And it meant really that after September 1930, none of the main political parties had enough support and votes to really agree on how to run the country, and it led to a collapse in democracy. The peak really of the financial crisis in Germany was in the summer of 1931. It was a banking crisis sparked off by the failure of the Danette Bank, which led to what's called a run on the banks, where everyone tries to withdraw money at the same time. It led to 5 banks collapsing and many people in Germany losing all of their money in their savings. Now, when you think that many of these same people had lost money through hyperinflation, it meant that people completely lost faith in the Weimar Republic and therefore were looking for alternatives. And when they started to look for those alternatives, they found them in political parties like the Nazis and the Communists. There's no surprise by January 1933, and some of the reasons for this are a little bit more complex than just the Great Depression, but President Hindenburg appointed Adolf Hitler as the Chancellor of Germany on the 30th of January 1933. So again, some nice statistics here which you can have a look at, which shows you the different chancellors, who they were during this time. So it was Hermann Müller, then Heinrich Brüning, then Franz von Papen, and Kurt von Schleicher, and then Adolf Hitler. And you can see that as we go through those different chancellors, the amount of deputies, that's like MPs within the Reichstag that support the government, goes down and down. So much so that democracy is not really functioning. You can see here, and you can pause this to have a look at it in a bit more detail, but you can see here the support, percentage support of the different political parties. So you can see parties like the Nazis and the Communists, okay, who are the KPD, the Nazis are the NSDAP. Their support grows a lot during this time. The more traditional Weimar Republic parties, like the SPD, for example, their support goes down a lot during this time. So this shows you again why the Weimar Republic collapsed. You can see here that one of the features that happens during this time is that the person who's Chancellor from 1930 to 1932, Heinrich Brüning, basically runs the country through the use of what's called Article 48 and basically gets the president to run the country for him. Article 48 is when you're allowed to make any decision you want with the support of the president. The president's basically allowed to run the country in an emergency. They class the economic depression as emergency, and basically they run the country through emergency laws. So you can see there that emergency laws are used 44 times in 1931 and 66 times in 1932. So it shows democracy is collapsing. Days the Reichstag met, German Parliament, 1930, 94 times. By 1932, only 13 times. How many laws passed by the Reichstag? 98 in 1930, 5 in 1932. So that's good evidence to show that democracy has collapsed. So to help you with this, you've got a sheet here which you're going to fill in, okay? And so I'm just going to pause that so you can spend 5 or 6 minutes just filling that in using the keywords at the bottom. And we'll go through the answers in just a moment. So we've just paused that for a minute. Okay, so let's go through the answers without further ado. So I'll just read it. The Weimar Republic did not have a strong leader to reduce the worst effects of the Depression. This was because Stresemann died in 1929, just a few weeks before the Wall Street crash. The Weimar Constitution caused problems as there were so many political parties. There were too many coalitions who were unable to provide solutions to the problems in Germany. The two main parties in the coalition government, the Centre Party and the SPD, fell out. Hermann Müller, who was the leader of the SDP, refused to agree to cuts in unemployment benefit. The leader of the Centre Party, Heinrich Brüning, wanted to bring in lots of cuts. Brüning became Chancellor of Germany, but he did not have enough support in the Reichstag to run the country. Brüning asked President Hindenburg to use Article 48 of the Constitution to issue laws without talking to the Reichstag. From 1930, Germany was no longer a democracy. The Reichstag met less and less frequently, and it was seen as ineffective. The German government was being controlled by an 84-year-old president. Brüning's government was very unpopular. He refused to increase government spending or print more money, remembering the hyperinflation crisis of 1923. Brüning raised taxes, reduced government spending, and cut unemployment benefit. Many Germans turned to extreme political parties, like the Nazis and the Communists. They seemed to offer solutions. The Communists blamed the capitalist system, the Nazis blamed Germany's economic problems on the Jews, the Weimar politicians, and the political parties. So that shows you some of the key reasons why the Weimar Republic was so weakened by the Great Depression. So, in summary, in October 1929, the Wall Street crash took place. It led to the collapse of the American economy. America recalled its short-term loans, causing the American economy to collapse, and the start of the Great Depression. The Great Depression devastated Germany, leading to 6 million unemployed and 5 banks going bust. Politically, the Weimar Republic was unable to cope, and extremist parties such as the Communists and the Nazis began to become more popular. So that hopefully shows you how important the Great Depression was in the history of Germany. Thanks for listening. Bye bye.